black community churches. And our church that was being ministered here at that time, we had a pastor that was Benson Smithers that we don't know much more about, but he would have been contemporary with Richard Preston at the time and Reverend Thomas, which our church is named after. Anyway, when the church was organized and reorganized again in 1856, and it was established under Richard Preston and Reverend Thomas after Benson Smithers was no longer the pastor. I think he may have died, or he might have got sick and was not able to perform his duties. I think after he died, Reverend Thomas became the pastor, and he also became the moderator after Reverend Richard Preston died. Richard Preston was the first moderator, and he was the one who organized. In fact, what Richard Preston was more like, he was performing more in the manner as the Apostle Paul did when he became a disciple of Christ. And the Apostle Paul went about in the Middle East and what would be called in Asia and whatever. He went to the places like Corinthia and Ephesus and all these places in the organized churches. And this is what Richard Preston had. You could call him more like an apostle, like the Apostle Paul did, and organized churches in the various black communities, like in Hammers Plain, down in Windsor, and places like that. And he organized in that sense. But just like the Christian who was scattered back at the time and when the early church was established, where people who were not apostles, but when they were scattered because the church was being persecuted, they ran to places of safety, and they took the gospel of Christ with them. And before Paul got to them, they had already established places where they were worshiping Jesus Christ, like the Church of Rome. It was not formed by Paul, but it was the people who were scattered who got the church going. Well, these people who came to our Preston area, we don't have any written documents to prove that to us, except for what was told to us orally, that they had meeting houses. So they brought with them, when they came escaping from slavery and when they came on British ships back at the time with the American Revolution, the war that was going on then, they brought with them what they had learned about Jesus Christ. And they formed their own meeting house, and they did the best they could in teaching people about the man called Jesus. And it was God sent, I guess, Richard Preston, who was trained and organized, sent to England and trained and ordained and came brought back, and he organized the African Baptist Association in 1832. So people who may have thought that the church was formed by Richard Preston, no, it was not. Richard Preston was the one who organized it in a better way because he had got some education. But there were people who had, the people themselves in the community had already started a place of worship and talked about the man called Jesus for themselves. And that's something that we can be proud of, to know that you can become a Christian without having all these people saying that you have to have education and all this type of stuff. Well, Peter, according to the scripture, indicated that those men whom Jesus called were ignorant men. And they were chosen by Jesus, and they went and they organized and they did things. And these people who were scattered and at Jesus' time, at Peter's time, to go to places like Ephesus and Corinthia and places like that, they weren't indicated as having all kind of education, but they took the Word of God with them, and the churches were established. And that's what we had. Our churches were not formally organized as the Richard Preston did, but they were already established, and then Richard Preston put them in a better form, and they had formed an association for the churches here. And you got a lot of the ancient people who may never be recorded, but one day we'll see it when we get to meet them after when Christ comes, and we'll all get together and know that they believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. So that's what I want you to know about the church, like Richard Preston, acting more like an apostle. Acted more like an apostle, and that's the paper I was talking about. He acted more like an apostle, and how that our churches was already formed, its worship place was already formed before his time, before Richard Preston. He came in the early 1800s, but we were here back, our people were here ever since 1784, and they were doing their own thing, teaching and doing the best they could with the knowledge that they had gained, and the Spirit of the God was with them, and they organized themselves to worship the Lord. Now, some of the people who were members of the church that was reorganized in 1856, you had people like one of the deacons was Mr. Rowan. Deacon Rowan, they call him. Old Joe Smith, first Joseph Smith, he was one of the deacons. And you had Thomas Johnson, he was the first clerk under that church, at the time. And the first pastor that was serving after it was organized into association was Benson Smithers. And if you were to do more looking at the history of the African Baptist Association, you'll find that the church here at the time, it was called, sometimes they call the church, when after the association was formed, they call it Second Preston. The church here, or South Preston. And when Thomas Johnson used to serve, he was the clerk, first clerk in that church. And you had other old people that were members of the church, Deacon Colley, they were the Deacon Colley of the church, and a few other people, old people that were there, and they served in that church for a long time, and they had organized. And Benson Smithers, I know that when he had started to build a church at one time, build a new facility, and in the process, I think that I thought I ran across a document that indicated that he had got sick and he could not continue on with what he was doing. And I don't know if it's, when I was reading one article, it indicated that Benson Smithers was still alive, and that Reverend Thomas had started the new church. But according to what I read in the article, that he had started the church, but Reverend Thomas, James Thomas, he's the one who finished off the church. And when Benson Smithers was gone, that during the time of they were having a annual meeting at I think it was in East Preston, and the moderator at the time was George Carvery. Washington, you remember there was a center that we had, a hall that was out on the number 7 highway. They called it George Washington Carver hall that was there. He was a minister, George Carver, and he had started his church, what was called the Fulton Church or something like that. But he was of the African Baptist Association, and as a moderator, we came over to the church that was being built, and that where the pastor James Thomas had become the pastor of the church, and he was ordained to well, not only ordained, but he was already ordained, but he had been confirmed as the pastor of the St. Thomas of the church. And in the process, in the early stages, after they got the church erected, and he was almost at the end of finishing it, what they were doing, he died or something like that. And the people, in honor of Reverend Thomas, who came from Wales, he was a white minister, and married a black woman from East Preston at that time. And when he died, the people loved him at the time, and they named our church, and I think it's the only church in the African Baptist Association that is named and called a saint, St. Thomas. They named it after Reverend Thomas as St. Thomas Baptist Church, and that's what we have here in North Preston, St. Thomas Baptist Church, and named in honor of the Reverend James Thomas, who was pastoring in East Preston, and he became the pastor of this church in North Preston. But he was not the first, it was not the first attempt to organize a church in North Preston. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was my great-grandmother. There are some who say that she was born somewhere else, that she was born in a neighboring community, which a lot of people wrote some stuff on and so forth like that. But in 1974, I was a student at St. Mary's University. And during the summer, when I was home for vacation, I was home for my vacation. And as a result, on my vacation, one summer I decided to go and talk with my grandmother, and she was at home in the house alone, sitting down on a couch. And she and I, we sat there and we talked about a lot of things. She told me about seeing slaves in shackles and stuff like that. She told me how that child, I seen them in shackles when they came into Halifax, and she was supposed to be a young person at that time. Well, she lived to be at least 106 plus. My grandfather-in-law told me that my great-grandmother was an old woman when he was a young man. Now, he died when he was 79 years old, but he told me all of this, that my great-grandmother was Mom Sue's, and she told me during that summer when I was interviewing her and writing down, I wrote down stuff she got, and I got so many papers I can't find it among the papers. I go sort through to see it. But she told me that when I asked a question about her birth and everything like that, she said, "Child, I was born here in North Preston. I was born," and that they would call North Preston at the time, New Road. That was the name that our community was called. It was called New Road as the result that the old road coming from on the street that I live on, the Upper Governor Street, it was the first road leading into the community, passing through Crane Hill and through East Preston, Glasgow Road, and up to Cali Road, what they call Upper Governor Street. And so she said that, "Child, I was born back here in New Road, up behind Gordon King." Now, some people will not know who it is, but the people in the community and people in the area, we know who it was. But she was born in this community, she said. And she said, "I was my mother's first child." Now, I said, well, she's telling me out of her own mouth. And she said, "My mother's name was Sadie Louise Kane." Now, some people may say, well, that can't be true. Well, I only can take it from the horse's mouth, and the horse was my grandmother, my great-grandmother. She said, my dear mother was Sadie Louise Kane. And she said that's where she was born at. She had lived up back where Uncle Gordon and what we call Aunt Fanny, someplace like that. And she told me all that summer when I sat there and talking to her. And I could still see her sitting with her glasses and looking up and sitting back all neatly and so comfortable talking about it. And she told me about the fact of, besides seeing people in shackles being in Halifax, slaves in shackles, she told me how that when she got around some young age, she was singing before they had the Halifax public garden built. It was just on the process of being planned, and she said she used to sing over there as a young girl. She sang at the Halifax, in the Halifax public garden. And you might notice that, you got a shoe off. Notice that on, there was a documentary done on my grandmother when she reached her 100th birthday. And she was telling that on, CBC made a recording on that. That might be, people might get that. But she told me a lot of stuff that was never written in history. And I was searching through the Encyclopedia Britannica and trying to, like, the name of our community, of Preston, A lot of people think that the name of the community came from Richard Preston, which is not so, because we were here and it was called the Township of Preston before Richard Preston landed here. He came here and in the around 1818, 1818 or 1813 or 15, between that time, looking, and he was supposed to be searching for his mother. And the place was called Preston. And it's a possibility that Richard Preston was a slave, and there's a possibility that he was an escaped slave, and at that time, in order to protect yourself, you changed your name so that the slave runners who were coming and even across the Canadian border, it wasn't called Canada at the time, but in the British colony, looking for slaves to try to take back to America, to the United States. Now, Richard Preston may have changed his name. Whatever his name was, he might have changed it from what it was, and he called himself Richard Preston, from where he also found his mother out on the East Preston side. So this is some of the things that my grandmother was saying. Well, she didn't see Richard Preston because he was gone before her time, but she was saying that how wonderful it was back at the time when people used to get together and talk about the history. And unfortunately, our history was never written down for us to go for. Therefore, we can look at, when I was searching in the Britannica, trying to trace the history and so forth, there was nothing written. Even in the modern time, there was nothing written on the people of Preston, as if we did not exist. We were so insignificant to, I guess you could call it systemic racism, that I guess we didn't mean nothing, just cheap labor. There was a time when the Maroons, who were here, when they could not bear the weather. The temperature was so cold for them that they some of them wanted to get out of here. And when they were taken out of here, there were those who wanted them to go, but then there were those who did not want them to go, and there was a protest by some of the white settlers that were here. They didn't want the Maroons to be taken out of here, but the Maroons were living a miserable life. The black people were living misery. They were in poverty. They had nothing. And besides suffering the cold temperature, the Maroons wanted to get away from this suffering they were having because the Jamaican colonial government was no longer supporting them. So when they moved out, we had some whites who did not want to lose their cheap labor. Not because they had a compassion for the Maroons, but it was cheap labor. And they didn't want the people to be taken to go to Sierra Leone. The Sierra Leone company, who had been given a contract to be able to get anyone that wanted to go, any of the Maroons or any of the blacks that were here that wanted to go to Sierra Leone. Well, they were about trying to get them to go. That some of them volunteered to go, many of them didn't. But that was the thing that was going on when the Maroons were here, and they were living a miserable life, and their land that they had was up there where the Atlantic Funeral Home now stands. That was the part of the land of the Maroons that the Jamaican government had purchased for them at the time when they came in around 1792, that they came here in Nova Scotia. And when the Maroons decided to go to Sierra Leone, where some was forced to go, whether they liked it or not, and they were the second people that were deported out of Nova Scotia. Beside the Acadian, the Maroons were deported. Not, like I pointed out to you when I read documents and pointed that not all of the people that went to Sierra Leone wanted to go. And some of them that really didn't want to go, they ran to places like the Preston. They ran to places like the Barrens, like up in North Preston, we got the Barrens, where the rocky land. They ran to hide so they wouldn't be taken by ship. Many of them were worried about that type of thing. But my great-grandmother, and she was telling me stuff that she had experienced and that she heard about and learned that were passed down to her by her ancestors or by her forefathers. And the thing that we as a black people must take pride in our oral history because our parents, our great ancestors were not allowed or didn't have the education, not because they didn't want education, but they did not have the education because it was against the law in the United States. And then when we got here, there was no education institution here for us to learn anything. And it didn't come into being until way after the fact, when you had some philanthropists who were concerned that we need to have our people educated, that they had them start a school or something like that in the 1800s to start a school in the area. But that's going to be another story. But that's what it was. My great-grandmother, I did have a picture to show you. I don't know where it went to. I was looking for it today. I have another black and white one, but that would not serve the purpose to show you exactly what Mum Sue's looked like. And she was born here in North Preston. For all of you in North Preston who didn't know and who had all kind of different viewpoints, well, my grandmother's Mum Sue said she was born here in North Preston. And she told me about her father who came to court. He was from Cherry Brook. And her father used to travel between the lake of what they call the watershed now, travel between the lakes, the Lake Major from Cherry Brook, up between the lakes and come up through the woods, go to up the cane where she was born at, living up there behind what they call Uncle Gordon Cane. And she told me that her father used to travel that way, and he would stay. He used to live in this community in the house that my great-grandfather lived in, my great-grandfather's house. And that was told to me. And I thought, well, I didn't know that. That's the thing that really surprised me to hear about her father living in the house that my great-grandfather lived in, down on Johnson Street, Johnson Road, things like that. So Mama Sudi was a great encyclopedia. If we only had them now, we let all those ancient people, all our ancestors, the older ones, almost all of them are gone. The one who knew stuff that we should have been writing down at the time. Well, I only got what I got because I was curious and asking questions. I wanted to know, and I used to talk to people like Mum Sulu's and Uncle Ernie Beals and Uncle Gordon Kane and old people like that. And I would sit down and talk and want to know about it. And my grandfather and my grandmother would tell me stories and tell me things about what happened and all that type of thing. So you young people, if you are listening, take advantage of the old people that you have left. We don't have many left in our community. We only have a few that in their 90s, and maybe 2 or 3 in our community. But all that history in the Preston area, and I think that goes not only in North Preston, but you young people in East Preston and Cherry Brook, talk and get as much. I believe you have more elder people in your community than we have here in North Preston now, because most of ours are gone. But if you can, that is a gold, that is a treasure that is worth more than gold. If you can get those type of things, and if the oral history, value that. The Jews valued the old oral history that was given to them before the Lord gave Moses the law written by his own finger. So you have to take advantage of what you have left and talk to them, and if you can get it written down or something like that, do that. I have not written it down too much. I got things written down, note here and there, but never had sitting down to put it into a formal order, like in a book form or anything like that. But young people, take advantage. Even though that when you say Black Lives Matters, we matters. Even though it wasn't in the past, Black Lives Matters. I have a partner coming in here now. My wife.
Go ahead, sorry.
She's shy, but she's.
Come this way.
We go
Come this way. Come this way. You can't get in over there. Come this way.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm late.
Well, this is my wife, Juanita.
Hold on, wait a minute. Go ahead.
This is my wife Juanita. She's late coming in, so she wasn't going to talk anyway. She's shy anyway about it. But
I don't know too much about the history anyway.
well, I got most of it already finished anyway. What I was talking about, what you made me lose the subject I was talking
Oh,
about.
sorry.
Lose the subject I was talking about just now about telling the young people. That's what I was telling the young people. Take value, take pride in the oral history that we have, and talk as much as you can with those who are left behind to get as much as you can about our oral history. Write it down, because I pointed out to you about Black Lives Matters. What you see, the movement of Black Lives Matters. Well, listen, Black lives always did matter, even though racism didn't allow it to be spoken of, or didn't allow us to even to be writing down or to learn about ourselves. But we always did matter. Black always didn't matter. Even though we were called all kinds of names and put down and maybe classified on the level of animals, which we knew was never the truth. God made us all from one man, Adam, and then because we all come from the same race, all of us came from the people that God created in the beginning, Adam and Eve, and every race on this earth came from those two. And whether you like the color of the skin of a person or not, just look at it. It said that we were made from the dust. Go to the ground. Some places you got white earth, white mud, or white sand. You got some places that got red sand. You got some places that got black earth, or whatever the case may be, black earth, or white earth, red earth, yellow earth. Look at, if we're made from the earth, look at it. We're all the same. Just that the color of the pigment of our skin, that don't make us any less than you are, and doesn't make you any greater than we are. We are all human and made in the image of God, and we in North Preston have never turned ourselves to be ashamed of who we are. We are proud in the Preston area. All of us in the Preston area, all of us who are black. I think there was a man called James Brown, said it back in the 60s, or the late 60s and the early 70s. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Well, we were always proud of who we were, even though we were called something less. But this is what you need to do. Take pride in your own history of who you are. Who you are, and you matter. And right now, you can educate the dominant culture here in our province, and not only the dominant, educate the other people in around the world. That we always were human, and when you go to search into, like some people say, wasn't no black people in the Bible, wasn't no, well, I'll tell you differently. You go to the Bible and none of us are back at that time. And none of us will be able to tell whether they were black or white or anything like that. But if you go and look at the Egypt, Egypt was black and white and whatever color you want to call it. And you had Ethiopia, which was a dominant power back then. I'm not giving you church history. I just will let you know that. Be proud of being who you are in the Preston area. East Preston, Cherrybrook, North Preston, and not just those communities, but Hammers Plains, Cubbica Road, the one you know Atherfield already proud of themselves, Beachville, Lucasville, all these places, wherever, Lincolnville, Digby, Jogging, or wherever you want to look at, be proud of who you are and dig up as much as you can, if you can recall from your people. Oral history, get that and put it down and save it. Be proud of being black.